Open world games are getting more and more popular by the day, and more of them are getting made each year. But what makes these games so popular and enjoyable that people spend hundreds of hours on them and maybe even play through them multiple times? Well, open world games have a vast world that urges the player to explore. As you roam around, the world puts interesting things in your way. And the details the best of these worlds have is precise and sometimes unbelievable. A game's main story is important, but the stories scattered across the world is what keeps people fascinated up to this day and makes them keep playing, as if they live in these worlds. Yet creating a game is not simple, let alone creating a great open world full of enjoyable content, to the point that it gets played after years and is worthy of getting re-released for newer consoles to experience the awesomeness. A lot of the game's world is determined by the time setting and fiction. Are fights done with guns or swords and bows? Do you travel by mounts, cars, or have they made air travel accessible? Our lives have gotten more complex with the passage of time, and recreating the modern world is not very easy because of that. So we are going to look into why a lot of open world games are set in older times and compare video game design. In older times, places weren't as populated, so the distinct characters will stand out. To the player, it will seem like a lot of the people have distinct backstories and personalities as well as quests to go on, rather than being just another generic pedestrian that we cannot have interactions with. A nice example would be Skyrim. Almost everyone is uniquely named with some amount of backstory, and they live in their own homes with their own schedule and jobs. Some of them had so many details put into their creation, they even have dialogue about the death of someone, even though the NPC doesn't even die in the game by normal means or quests.
I was apprenticed to Balamund before he died. He taught me everything I know about forging armor and weapons.
Older buildings also aren't tall apartments, meaning if we can enter one, we might be able to explore almost all of it. Having more of the world accessible to the player is important in creating an immersive experience, but only when it isn't repetitive. The Yakuza game series makes up for the small map by having unique content all over the place. Let's talk about exploration. Getting to places should be a nice experience, but the player should also be able to discover the side content of the path too. I know that some games have missed this point by having too big of a map, most notably Starfield. Your speed should also be adjusted according to the map size. Going on foot in a huge area will only make it seem more empty. Having the right speed and the right size helps alongside having a good design. It will make the open world attract the player, and creating an older world with these characteristics is less challenging than a complex modern city with huge buildings. Combat is another part of games, and guns just might be another problem, since gunfights aren't as simple as walking up to someone and slashing them. The concept of just shooting someone is of course simple, but realistically speaking, gunfights would require you to get to cover and do a bit of thinking since both sides have guns. While it could be simple enough for the player, having AI navigate and fight their way through might prove to be challenging to make, especially in a big open world. But just because creating a modern city is harder, it doesn't mean developers should stick to older times. In fact, at this point, big studios would probably have no problem with developing these games given their increasingly large wealth. Grand Theft Auto, which might be the most popular game franchise of our current time, was unbelievably expensive to make. And every other game similar to GTA is called a GTA clone. Perhaps the reason for these clones not getting the redemption they need is the lack of effort put into them. Saints Row and Watch Dogs were trying to head into a good direction and make progress, but suffered dearly because of mistakes one would expect from amateurs rather than a company spending millions of dollars making these games. And in the end, complexities shouldn't stop developers from making great games. Cutting corners often hurts the experience, and crossing the line and pushing the limits of what's possible leads to well-celebrated games. Skyrim managed to do so much on consoles that only had half a gigabyte of memory. Yet Bethesda continues to release games that are downgrades compared to the 2011 game. Rockstar Games always pushes the limits and perhaps raises the bar for the whole video game industry, and the end result has always been marvelous and a lot more profitable. CD Projekt also managed to do a lot with a small budget for The Witcher 3. That means the love and effort put into making the product also matters. So I guess we can conclude that the lack of good modern game worlds, especially from big studios, isn't because they are hard to make, but more likely because they either don't know how to make a good product at all, or they just don't want to. Maybe if a certain big studio stopped making glorified DLCs, we would have had a game that actually competes with GTA.